So if you're new here, I'm building a V10 Nissan Patrol. And I started off with a short wheelbase, tore it apart, V10, took that apart as well, put it back together, and it runs, and now I've got a V10. So now you know. Hey, look! It's that guy from the internet who makes videos sometimes. That's right, we're back to V10 shenanigans that have nothing to do with this thing that's right in front of me. Instead, I'll be focusing on something that I've tried and failed to do before. But what's that over there? That's right, it's the remains of that fuel tank that I made many episodes ago. And never finished. And here's why. Because I suck at welding. That's all. That's only partly true. The other thing is finding someone to weld it for me was an absolute bloody nightmare. The mistake I made when making this the first time was to score these seams a bit more deeply than I should have. And what this would have meant is that everything here would have to be reinforced with TIG welding, which dramatically increases the cost. The other thing you'll notice, if you know anything at all, is that bending these is probably a pretty complicated thing to do. And you'd need special machines, like this one. And I don't have it. And neither do any of the people I've asked to help me weld this tank, paid or unpaid. So what do I do from here? I do it again, but better this time. Using materials that I know how to work with. I figured I'd get at least some V10 in this video at some point. Anyway, this video is going to be slightly more boring / interesting than my usual videos, because I'm going to be talking more about machinery and other things. Starting with this one. Well, what is it? Well, it's a CNC plasma cutter, of course. What the bloody hell is the point of it? Well, going back to this mess, if you want to make complicated shapes accurately, it's the best thing for the job. So let me show you its features. To put it simply, you can use CAD software to make a 3D model of something, do a few clicks, turn it into sheet metal, and then you can basically virtually smash it with a hammer and make it flat. And this flat thing is the thing that the machine then cuts out for you. And then once it's in the real world, you can start folding it and sticking it together with hot metal bits. Now my metal of choice today is this. This is 2mm mild steel, or 12 gauge if you're American, and not a shotgun. Now I have chosen mild steel because it's a metal that I'm very familiar with working with, so I'm pretty confident I can get good results. It's basically incredibly easy to weld and bend, and this machine has no problem slicing through it. Now what you have here is basically a plasma cutter that's controlled by computers. And this one can operate on a 3D plane. Kind of. You've got your left, right, up, down. And then you've got your Z height controller. That one's extremely critical. More on that in a bit. Now another thing you might notice is this weird kind of muddy liquid in here. And there are quite a few reasons for this. Firstly, it's got some antibacterial stuff in it to stop it growing mold and organisms that might take over the world, but it's also there for heat control. Now this little guy, he cuts your metal with a few thousand degrees. And if you know how to physics, you'll be familiar with this. What this basically tells you is that as metal heats up, it expands. And it's relative to the starting length of the metal, the type of metal, and how much the temperature increases by. You can mess around with this, or you can just remember one basic rule. A meter length of steel expands about 1 millimeter for every 100 degrees it goes up in temperature. But the maths works out, so do it however the hell you want. Anyway, mystery liquid. Also gets splashed up by that thing, cooling the bottom of the metal as you cut it. And this helps prevent all manner of nasties, such as warping, and it also makes the tools last much longer. And the last thing of consideration is something called kerf width. And what that basically is the width of the channel that gets cut by your tool as you're cutting the metal. Now these are all things you have to take into account when you're designing stuff on these sorts of machines. Because if you start making an exact tolerance and then it expands, you're not going to be in tolerance anymore. Also, if you start cutting stuff out without considering your kerf width, you're going to end up with stuff that's out of tolerance by the width of that. But aside from that, pretty simple. So in my case, I have a fuel tank that I've had to split down the middle and then smash it with a big virtual hammer to make it flat, and finally rearrange the bits from each half so that they actually fit my machine, because my machine's quite small. I can basically do about 1.3 meters width by about 1.2 meters height, which is just enough for this tank, luckily. Anyway, back over here again. This is the top half of the tank. So now I have to use that machine we've just wasted all this time talking about, cutting out the bottom half and the rest of the other gubbins that are associated with it. You're basically an idiot if you don't make sure the software lines up with the hardware. Otherwise you'll end up cutting thin air and wasting loads of metal. Now CNC plasma cutting is essentially a combination of welding and machining. You've got to consider things like a pierce depth, speeds and feeds, and the amount of amps you're pumping into the piece of metal. And these all contribute to having a good result at the end. For example, if you don't have enough amps, you've got too much speed, you're either not going to cut through the metal or you're going to get a really crap result. Alternatively, too many amps, not enough speed, you're putting too much heat into the metal, it's going to warp, and you'll also burn through your tips like no business. And those are quite expensive. Anyway, it's pretty easy to find a fine balance between the two. There are charts that exist, so there's nothing really that you're going to struggle with. Now unfortunately, this is the part of my adventure where the compromises begin, and it all stems from not having a fancy bending machine. And what I'm going to have to do is score all these folds so that when I try to bend these by hand, it's going to follow the path of least resistance. Because right now, I can't predict where these bends are exactly going to be, because I've got no way of holding them. Whereas if I cut through about 0.5 millimeter of steel on each fold, that's the bit where it's going to fold. You can pretty much guarantee that. Another thing I have to do is make sure I'm folding it in the right direction. Because if I fold it one way and find out that it's a mirror image of what it's supposed to be, I'm going to be a bit cross. So what I'll do is I'll use my pre-folded stainless one and see if it fits. And if it does fit, then I'll know to fold it in the same direction as this. So this one fits. All I have to do is bend it the same as that and it's all good. Bending the bottom one doesn't really matter because it's pretty symmetrical anyway. So that can be my test. So if you're going to go to Sydney 4-wheel drive show and you can guess what this was used for, you'll win a sticker. Now let's assume I haven't messed anything up. Each of these slots is about 0.5 millimeter thick, deep even. So that means if I try and bend this, it should go exactly along that line, because that's the easiest place to bend. I'm guessing these seams are going to be pretty difficult to bend, but it'll be manageable. So let's find out. So this is harder to bend up than I first anticipated, but I'd rather it was more difficult and get a bit of exercise in, than find out later that I've cut too far through the material and made it weaker. So I'm going to struggle gradually welding these seams around. Once these are all welded in place, I'll then be able to bend the rest of it back into the correct position, and with any luck, the end result will be half a fuel tank. Now if you squint and take your glasses off, you might be fooled into thinking this looks like the bottom half of a fuel tank, because that's exactly what it is. But there's more to a fuel tank than just a thing that holds fuel. And I need to put things called baffles inside. And I know I touched on this in the last fuel tank episode, but I've decided I'm going to put 3 baffles in this tank. One going from here to there, same on the other side, and then one going straight down the middle. And this is going to serve 2 purposes. Firstly, it's going to stop the fuel sloshing around and adding extra stress to all the joints on this fuel tank, but it's also going to add a lot of rigidity to it. And lastly, it's going to help a lot with the alignment process, because the way I've designed these baffles is that they stick out above this surface. And what that means is once I've folded up that other half of it and slotted it on the top, it's going to basically lock into place while I weld it. So, baffles. So here are my baffles. There are 3 of them. And this is where things start to get a little bit more critical. Here's why. Because Volkswagen, that's why. And every little electrical piece and pipe in there has to go somewhere in this fuel tank, along with all those baffles. So I think I mentioned this before. This baffle goes somewhere in the middle, like that. And one of these is going to go either side like this. And as with everything in this build, I'm going to be strapped for space, because I have to fit a fuel pump here, a fuel pump there, all of the pipes and wiring, as well as have enough space for the fuel tank level sender to operate up and down. Now I've anticipated this somewhat. There's all this access here that I'm going to run all the tubes and whatever's through here, and I've just realized something. I forgot that I had a top half of the tank ready-made. So I can throw this on like that. Completely precise and accurate. But I've basically got nice access there that I can put a fuel pump in on either side, and everything will be accessible once it's all welded together. Now, thanks to the joys of CNC precision, it's more accurate than your average human. This means that basically this is all slotted in so perfectly that it holds itself together. More or less. And this is going to make it much easier for me to find out where I'm going to mount these fuel pumps. I'm going to get diesel in you one way or another. May as well be now. So I can unplug this stuff, as long as I remember where it goes. We interrupt this montage for a word from our sponsor. Fuck! That's right, there are no sponsors. So stop emailing me, rubbish companies. I don't want your crap batteries and head units. Instead, I'm going to tell you about the Sydney 4-Wheel Drive Show, where I'll be with this. I've also used AI to pre-program this wonderful voice-activated window, so you can come down and shout at it, and if you can get it to open, you win a prize. Stephen. There's also unfortunately a software bug that means if you scream loudly at the window, it also opens, but I didn't tell you that. Also, even though nobody who watches this channel cares about bikes, the bike that I rode around the world is going to be there. Not this one though. Get the hell out of my workshop. You can also buy lots of marvellous products that I've been designing in the background, such as do-it-yourself steel flat pack bonnet scoops, Nissan Patrol coil tower covers, for alcoholics. There's also a version available for designated drivers. Door protectors, to stop idiots breaking your doors because they don't know how real carriers work. Oh no. If only there was something there to protect my door from this. And finally, non-prototype versions of my marvellous table that lets you open drawers. So feel free to show up here on these dates at this stand, because I'll be there. And now, back to our feature presentation. And unfortunately, thanks to Volkswagen being Volkswagen and having all number of lights, knobs and dials that I'll never fully understand, I've had to get rid of that central divider, which was the last baffle that I was going to put in. But I'm still able to maintain these two. I just have to mount these pumps like this roughly, and it'll be plenty strong enough. It's only 100 litres of tank, which means that you're talking about 80 kilograms of fuel in there sloshing around. Let's say 60% of it is in the middle, which means stress-wise, there's not much on the whole thing. And this basically means that once I've finished doing all this stuff inside the tank, I'll be able to put the fuel tank together, something like that, and have a fuel tank. If this is ready by the 4-wheel drive show, you'll be able to see it running, maybe if you're lucky. bundles of joy are going to be brackets so that I can mount these things into the bottom of the tank. I'm basically going to drill and rivet those into the side of this, 3 on each side. And then I'm going to weld them to the bottom of the tank. And then once that's done, the pumps themselves are just a 1/4 turn fit into there. And with a couple of welds, these are now permanent, which is probably not the most ideal thing considering I've got a shitload more welding to do, but I don't really have much other choice really, unless I can find some other fancy way to mount these, which I can't because they were glued in the first place. Anyway, my floats are operational, and all I have to do is wait for it to cool down and put some stuff in and see if it fits. Now I know this looks incredibly messy, mostly because it is, but with all of these kind of retained within the tank, that's everything completely functional in there. So I should have a relatively accurate fuel gauge. With pickups that go to different areas of the tank, they just have to be attached to this little wire there. But those are kind of in the right place. One on the left, one on the right, so that if the car's tipped over, you're still getting fuel. And with any luck, when I throw the top on, the access is absolutely perfect. I'll be able to get all the pumps and everything in and out really easily. I'm pretty satisfied with that. The thing I was worried about actually was the clearance between the top of the pump and the top of the tank. And that's because you can see this is quite deep. I'd say that's maybe 80 mil deep. But that's perfect. Brilliant clearance on everything. And the final concern for finishing this tank is basically stopping these from getting damaged, seeing as I can't take them out anymore. So what I'm probably going to do is get a little bit of sections of fire blanket, put them over there. And that's mainly for while I'm welding up this seam between the two tanks. And as you can tell, I'm winding this video down. Just for the record, this happens when I've been working too hard and I'm very hungry. I'm hungry. So I'm going to finish this fuel tank off in the background. And you're going to come and see this car running at the 4-wheel drive show. So come and see my half-finished crap. And this bike that became a piece of crap due to me riding it extremely long distances. And buy some of the crap that I make. There will also be no V10 conversion kits for sale. So stop emailing me about them. I'm selfish and I want the only one. So this is the end of the video. I'm going to take off this stupid thing because I've only just seen that I'm still wearing it in the viewfinder. Now I'm going to pay excessive amounts of money for stupidly priced supermarket food. Bye.